Have you ever stood in a quiet forest or looked out over a vast empty plain and wondered? Have you ever felt the echo of something ancient, a story that was here long before the cities, the roads, and the noise? What if I told you the story of America doesn't begin where most history books say it does? It doesn't start with a ship, a flag, a famous declaration written on parchment. It begins with a whisper on the wind, a footprint on the earth, a story told around a fire under a blanket of stars. This is a story about all of us, much bigger and much older than you might imagine. The land we call America has a memory. It remembers the thunder of millions of bison. It remembers the taste of clean water in rivers so clear you could count the stones. Long before any European explorer dreamed of sailing west, this continent was alive with people. Think of it not as an empty wilderness, but as a bustling neighborhood of nations. In the dense forests of the East, tribes like the Iroquois built longhouses, creating complex societies governed by councils of elders and clan mothers. They were skilled farmers growing corn, beans, squash. The Three Sisters travel west in your mind, out onto the Great Plains. Here, nations like the Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche lived in rhythm with the mighty bison. In the Southwest, the ancestral Puebloans built magnificent cliff cities. They were master architects, potters, and ingenious farmers. From the Pacific Northwest, where the Salish carved totems and lived by the sea, to the Everglades, where the Calusa built on water. This land was a mosaic of human ingenuity. Before books were printed and history was written down on paper, how did people remember their past? For the first peoples of this land, the answer was simple, yet profound. They told stories. Native Americans were the original historians, poets, teachers. A story wasn't just entertainment. It was a vessel that carried the most important things a community knew. It was their library, their school, their sacred text. Imagine a grandfather sitting with the children of his village as the sun sets, the fire crackling before them. His voice is the bridge between the past and the future. He tells them of the trickster coyote, whose foolishness teaches them about the consequences of greed and arrogance. He shares the creation story of their people, explaining how the mountains and rivers were formed and what their sacred duty is to the land. These oral traditions were incredibly precise and powerful. For thousands of years, the world of the First Nations was complete. But one day, something new and unexpected appeared on the eastern horizon. It started as a speck, then grew into a strange shape, a wooden ship with giant white sails. This was the moment the two halves of the human family, separated for millennia, would meet again. This first encounter was a moment of pure wonder, confusion, and curiosity for both sides. Imagine you are a member of the Taino people in the Caribbean, and you see Christopher Columbus's ships arrive in 1492. You see men with pale skin, hairy faces, and shiny metal clothing. They speak a language you have never heard, and they carry objects you cannot comprehend. Your first instinct might be generosity. You share your food, you show them kindness. You try to understand who they are and where they come from. It was a moment of immense potential, a chance for two worlds to learn from one another, to share knowledge, and to build something new together. But the newcomers had different ideas. They came not just to visit, but to claim. They were driven by a desire for gold, for land, and for glory for their kings and queens far across the ocean. They saw the land not as a living mother, but as a resource to be exploited. They saw the people not as equals in different nations, but as obstacles or potential laborers. They also brought invisible invaders, diseases like smallpox and measles that swept through native communities with no immunity. The world the First Nations had known for centuries began to crumble from conflict and a silent biological tragedy. As more Europeans arrived, they began to build small settlements along the coasts, little footholds in a vast continent. These were places like Jamestown in Virginia, Plymouth in Massachusetts. The people who came were seeking different things. Some were looking for wealth, hoping to find gold or grow valuable crops like tobacco. Others, like the Pilgrims, were seeking religious freedom. They were brave and determined, facing starvation, harsh winters, and the unknown. These early colonies were like tiny islands in a vast Native American sea. At first, survival depended entirely on the help and knowledge of the local tribes. It was the Wampanoag people who taught the Pilgrims how to plant corn and where to fish. This cooperation is the story we remember at Thanksgiving. Over time, however, the colonies grew. More people crossed the Atlantic and settlements expanded into territories. The newcomers brought with them the idea of owning land, of drawing lines on a map and saying, "This is mine." This was a concept completely alien to native peoples, who believed the land was a shared gift from the Creator. This fundamental disagreement over land became the source of endless conflict, pushing native nations further and further west as the colonies relentlessly expanded. New threads, with different colors and textures, were being woven into the ancient design. These new threads came from England, Africa, Germany, and many other places. As the colonies grew and prospered over 150 years, a new kind of person began to emerge. They weren't quite English anymore. They were born on this land. Their families had lived here for generations. They were used to solving their own problems, building their own communities, making their own rules. Far from the watchful eye of the king, an ocean away, a feeling of distance began to grow. The king and the British government saw the colonies as a source of income. A sense of unfairness started to bubble up. This feeling was captured in a simple but powerful phrase: no taxation without representation. The colonists argued they should have their own elected officials and a say in the laws that govern them. They were watered by fiery speakers like Patrick Henry and brilliant writers like Thomas Paine. Colonists weren't just complaining about taxes, they were talking about a whole new way of thinking about government. The seeds of a revolution were planted, ideas about liberty, equality, and self-government. A powerful dream was taking hold, not being a distant part of an old empire, but creating something entirely new, a nation built on freedom. The growing disagreement between the American colonies and Great Britain became like a heated family argument that could no longer be resolved with words. The king sent soldiers to enforce his laws, and the colonists began to organize and arm themselves in defense of what they saw as their rights. The first shots were fired in Massachusetts. Lexington, conquered. It was a point of no return. The argument had turned into a fight, a struggle that would become the American Revolutionary War. It was fought by farmers, blacksmiths, merchants, teachers, ordinary people who believed so strongly in an idea that they were willing to risk everything for it. They were called the Continental Army, led by a quiet, determined Virginia farmer named George Washington. They were often outnumbered, underfed, and poorly equipped, facing the most powerful military force in the world. Many times it seemed hopeless, that this bold experiment in freedom was doomed to fail. In the midst of this struggle, leaders gathered in Philadelphia in the summer of 1776. They decided it was time to make it official, to explain to the world exactly what they were fighting for. A young, talented writer named Thomas Jefferson drafted words that would echo through history. "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." After years of difficult fighting, with crucial help from allies like France, the impossible happened. The small, scrappy Continental Army defeated the mighty British Empire. The war was over. But winning the war was in some ways the easy part. Now came the truly hard part. How do you actually build a nation? How do you take 13 separate bickering colonies and unite them into one country? Their first attempt, the Articles of Confederation, was too weak. So they gathered once again in Philadelphia and drafted the Constitution, a brilliant, imperfect compromise. It created a strong but limited federal government divided into three branches: the President, the Congress, the Supreme Court. They added the Bill of Rights, the first 10 amendments, to protect individuals. These amendments guaranteed freedoms like freedom of speech, freedom of religion, and the right to a fair trial. This framework completed the foundation of the new republic. The United States of America was born, an experiment founded not on ancestry but on ideas. Liberty, equality, self-government. The flag, stars and stripes, symbolized a union of states bound together. But the story was far from over. The nation was still a work in progress. So what does this long, complicated story mean for us today, on this day in 2025? It means the story of America isn't finished or put away in a museum. It's a living, breathing thing still being written, and every single one of us holds a pen. The great tapestry is not complete. New threads are added every single day, Every action we take, every choice we make, every story we choose to tell. Your family's story is a thread in that design. Your voice, your dreams, and your actions will shape the pattern for generations. America holds beautiful ideals and painful contradictions, proclaiming equality while holding people in bondage, celebrating freedom while taking land from First Peoples. That tension, our aspirations versus our truths, is the central struggle. How can we make life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness real for everyone? How do we honor First Nations stories and learn to care for the earth? How do we heal old wounds of injustice and build a more perfect union? These aren't questions for politicians or historians alone. They are for all of us. Look around. The tapestry is woven from threads from every corner of the world in every color imaginable. So the final question isn't what it means. It's what you'll do with it. What kind of thread will you be? Think about it. Talk with someone you love about it. The story continues with you.